So when the music starts, the lights...
Yeah, so that, but you can put it on the audience so that they enter. I'm organizing a big event at the biggest theater in this part of Europe. And we are marking the 4th anniversary of Julian Assange's political asylum in Ecuador. So it's happening at the same day today in Berlin, Brussels, Belgrade, Bucharest, Paris, Naples, Madrid, Sarajevo. These are all the venues, all our people. I think this case is not just about Julian Assange, it's about transparency, it's about democracy in Europe.
Are you nervous about speaking on stage? How does this fit in with your normal life?
This is normal life.
To change the world, to fight injustices, are today in a very strange situation.
But don't philosophers just sit in a room and write books?
Yeah, some of them.
Tell me what you do.
Sometimes I write books.
But also...
But I also do this, I also go to refugee camps.
So do you think you're a new kind of philosopher?
I don't have time to think about myself anymore. I'm also stressed. But it's not good. It will be me as speaker and Yanis Varoufakis as speaker. Where do we get in? From this side we get in.
So as you know, we are going to listen and to have a conversation with two major intellectual European figures.
Why am I here?
So please welcome them both on stage. SREČKO, HORVAT and Jens Varoufakis.
What I learned from Julian Assange is that you have to be consistent. Maybe sometimes you have this temptation to think that we are not important, that the powers are smiling at us and laughing when we occupy a square, that they are laughing when we are in a public space. But hello, we have 2,000 people here tonight, in 8 cities at the same time, hundreds of thousands watching the live stream, and I think the most... Today you cannot just sit in a room and write books. Even if you want to write about the refugee crisis, you cannot do it if you didn't speak to a refugee, for instance. Or if you are writing about the crisis of Europe or solutions for Europe, I think you cannot do it if you don't speak with the people. I think we don't have time only to sit in a room and write about it. We need to act because this continent is collapsing. The financial crash of 2008 started in America's housing market, but devastated Europe as it lurched from sovereign debt crisis to economic stagnation. Unemployment of 25% in some countries led to social unrest, and the continent suffered the worst terrorist attacks in years. And that was before over 1 million refugees decided to walk the Balkan route into Europe. Often all this is discussed as forces of nature beyond our control. But as a philosopher, I look for the root causes. What if the economic collapse, refugees and terrorism are actually all caused by something more fundamental? I'm going on a journey across Europe in search of what connects the crises tearing our continent apart. Thessaloniki, northern Greece. If you just visit its central square, you'd never guess this small, charming city is at the epicenter of Europe's problems. In 2015, refugees fleeing war and poverty walked into Europe through the nearby village of Idomeni. Germany said they would accept Syrians, but after more than 1 million people came, Europe panicked and sealed the border, trapping those who continued to come in hope. Greece finally cleared the Idomeni camp in May 2015, citing sanitation and safety. But that's not the whole story. We are heading towards a new refugee camp where the refugees from Idomeni were moved, and we are going to meet Mustafa there. Mustafa is from Aleppo and reached Idomeni just as the border was closed. He spent 3 months there hoping and trying to cross before the authorities cleared the camp. And would you say, are the conditions better here than in Idomeni? Like what was better there and what is better here?
Yeah, actually, here is better. It's a closed place. It protects you from the sun, from raining, from the wind. And for the tent, here is big. But nobody knows how long we're going to stay. They give no information about that. Like, you ask how long we're going to stay, how long it takes for the pre-registration. They said nobody knows.
Mustafa is taking us back to Idomeni to explain why the camp was cleared. And this is something I wasn't expecting. A motorway service station transformed by those refusing the government camps. The services allowed them to stay, but at the same time doing good business charging them for showers.
Now it's 100% change. The place, it used to be full of tents.
And now no one.
Now only me.
Can you show us a bit how it looked like at the tracks?
Yeah.
So refugees had tents on all this place here, right?
Yeah, this one, even here, it's like full of tents.
These tracks are the most important route from Greece's seaports, a crucial way for local companies and multinationals to get their goods into the heart of Europe. Ah, there is a train coming.
Yeah.
So when the tents were here at this place, there were no trains coming, right?
Yeah, it's become like for 2 months, there is no trainway. They try many times to bring the train, ask people to open it, and nobody open it.
Do you think the refugees represented a problem for the free moving of goods and products?
There is a ministry who come here, and he said that they should open the railway. Like, they tried with many ways. We told them that your economics are not more important than our children. We will open it when you open the border.
So you were blocking the trains deliberately. You knew that if you were blocking the way, that Europe and the Greek state, they will start to react.
Yeah.
The Greek train company OSE told us they couldn't move goods for 75 days, costing them $2.5 million in lost shipping fees. I think Idomeni is the best metaphor for what is happening in Europe today, in the sense that it shows that people, refugees who were fleeing from war and from war zones such as Syria, but also Afghanistan and Iraq, became a problem. Why? Because we are at a train track and they were blocking the train track. So it became a problem for the corporations, for also other countries, not only Greece, because this way was blocked. So on the one hand, what you can see is that refugees don't have the right to move freely. On the other hand, goods can move freely as far and as much as they want. But Greece is subject to forces beyond its control. The global financial crash revealed that Greece had taken out a mountain of loans from European banks. At the urging of European leaders, Europe's financial institutions gave Greece the biggest loan in history. And most of that money flowed straight back to the mainly French and German banks who had encouraged them to borrow. But the loan conditions required extreme austerity, state spending cuts so severe that the economy shrunk by a quarter. Unemployment reached 27%, prompting a huge rise in suicide. Another condition was mass privatization of Greek assets, including the strategically important port of Piraeus. It is one of the most important ports in the Mediterranean, and recently the Greek government has sold 67% of the shares to a Chinese company called COSCO. The docks are quiet today, The sell-off has prompted a battle with the unions. They say the troika of the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank and the European Commission are experimenting with a new kind of privatization. You're at strike already for how many days?
20 days today. We're at the 20th day of strike.
So where are we going now?
We are going to a trade unionist meeting. It's an international trade unionist meeting. They're very much interested in the privatization model that is used in these two ports, which is highly unusual, since they privatize even the Port Authority, or at least serious features of the Port Authority.
And we are now at the Port Authority. This is the building of the Port Authority.
Yes, now we are in the Piraeus Port Authority headquarters, and it will be privatized. The day after, this building will be given to COSCO.
Because COSCO doesn't recognize unions, the dockers fear they will go from being skilled employees with secure jobs to temporary workers with no rights. Can you explain us what is the difference between the working conditions is the part of Piraeus which is still owned by the Greek state and at the part which is already owned by COSCO?
They are using a complex system of subcontractors. So there is no direct employment by COSCO. They have a precarious employment. That means they work 10, 12, 15 days a month. So there is no stable job for them. There is no certain schemes of training, professional training. So that's why there are frequent accidents in this terminal.
So will this maybe also this model will be of subcontracting expanded to other ports in Europe?
The last 6 years, Greece is an experiment for Troika and neoliberal policies. What they are testing here, they try to export it in other countries in the European Union.
What we have seen in Port Piraeus is that the biggest historical achievements of the European project, such as collective bargaining, such as trade union organizing, minimal wages, all of this is actually disintegrating. Many blame the Chinese company COSCO, but I'm meeting former Greek finance minister Yannis Varoufakis, who has astonishing inside information about Europe's part in the deal. No, it seems this is not working.
Mr. HORVAT.
Yannis.
It's good to see you. Amongst the first things I did in the ministry, day one, day two, was to embark upon a kind of silent negotiation with the Chinese authorities and with the COSCO CEO. And we agreed to collective bargaining and to allowing trade unions to represent workers throughout the port, if they were given the rest of the port. Secondly, they agreed on a spectacular investment program of anything between 250 and 300 million euros within 18 months. That would have been a fantastic injection of capital, of activity, of jobs in the port of Piraeus. And finally, and most importantly, they were prepared, the Chinese government, to contribute, to purchase a bond, a new bond that we would issue as the Ministry of Finance up to 10 billion. So effectively, they would help us return to the markets and create effectively a signal to the rest of the world that Greece is back. Now, I thought that that was a very good deal. And guess what happened? There was a telephone call from Berlin to Beijing saying, keep off Greece while we're negotiating with them. And all deals were off because, of course, China is not going to jeopardize its relationship with the heart of Europe in order to seal a deal with us.
Currently, the Greek government is selling 67% of the port of Piraeus. And under your deal, it was supposed to be 51, right?
Yes. All those things that we had negotiated, the Troika made sure that we're not part of the deal. They just did not want any European peripheral country to begin to imagine that if they voted people like us in, they would get a better deal even for one person.
Although hugely important for Greece, Piraeus is only a tiny part of the 35-year program of privatization across Europe. Sectors like railways, energy, post, banking, and airlines were all part of the $1 trillion of public assets privatized since 1980. It was the United Kingdom under Margaret Thatcher that led the charge for privatization in Europe. David Hall has been studying the impact of it for over 30 years. Privatization supposedly reduces prices, improves services, and so on. What has your experience and your studies shown?
It doesn't reduce prices, and it usually doesn't improve services. And in many cases, it makes services worse. That's the basis on which privatization was always sold, but immediately people have experience of privatization. Almost the first thing that happens is that prices go up. Prices go up because the private companies that have taken over are in the business of restructuring it to generate returns that the public company didn't get.
Which might explain why it's usually met with popular resistance. But it's almost always forced through. When Italians voted in a referendum to end laws promoting water privatization, the government tried to reintroduce them and left the water utilities in private hands. Why do you think that most of the governments in Europe, but also in Latin America and the States, still stick to this kind of economic model?
Privatizations are seen as an easy way of getting large amounts of money into government, so you can use it either to reduce debt or to reduce taxes. And that's how Thatcher used it, and that's how again and again governments do it. And that's how, for example, countries like Greece are being instructed to use it by the IMF. This is the core purpose of privatization in the Greek context, is to generate revenue to reduce the debt.
And once something is in private hands, it is at risk of takeover by larger, often foreign companies. I'm in Romania, where they recently protested against water and health privatization. But nothing seems to get them as worked up as their forests. Since being handed back to private owners, they've been heavily exploited by international investment firms and European wood processing companies. On the border with Transylvania is one of the forests that has been decimated. It's irreplaceable, according to the lawyer representing forest owners.
Romania have the last intact forest landscape, where the man has not intervened. These forests are today they are not protected.
How far away is it actually?
1 hour, or depend of the road, 1 hour and a half.
The illegal clear-cutting mainly happens in remote places, high up in the mountains. Romania was a colony of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and now, as the second poorest country in the European Union, is again on the periphery of a giant. Their relative poverty means cutting gangs can exploit forests the country can't afford to protect.
You see it? Where there is no forest? You see it? Here we can see the...
Wow, so this is it finally, huh?
Yeah. And from here we don't see it all. It's bigger than this.
What we can see here is completely illegal,
Completely. Right? Usually you are not allowed to cut more than 3 hectares of forest, clear cut.
And how big is this approximately?
150, 200 hectares of forest, but it's entirely gone. And we hear it now, they are still cutting it. They cut it every day.
Since when did this start, and what is the scale of this clear cutting in Romania?
The big ones, beginning after 2002, 2003, that was the moment when the SREČKO company opened their first factory in Sebeș, in Alba County.
The Austrian company Holstein-Schweighofer are now Romania's largest wood processor. They don't cut the woods themselves, but they're able to offer a relative fortune to those who will.
Mostly, these clear cuts are done by the Romanian peoples. The gang who cut this forest forged the documents, and when they reached the Vaufor factory, they had some documents to show them. They didn't respect any law or any regulation.
But at the factory, some don't even need forged documents. The Environmental Investigation Agency posed as a cutting gang willing to ignore the law, something that didn't present a problem for SREČKO.
A little bit concerns me is the rigidity of the volume that we have to produce every year.
It's not a problem of rigidity from our side, because you decide what you want to sell.
We asked SREČKO for an interview, but they declined. So we turned to Hans, a green activist who has been sued by SREČKO.
It's huge, huh?
Wow.
One of their employees, a manager, has admitted that if they run at full capacity, there's no place for other processors on the market.
Can you tell us, once they end up in this factory, where do they go?
This sawmill is actually slicing up the logs. They make planks out of it, and then they export it worldwide. Be it China, be it Japan, the Arab countries, even USA. It's a world market. The main problem is the fact that there's not much left for us. The added value happens somewhere else. The jobs happen, so to say, somewhere else.
All of this exploitation of nature is happening in Romania, but nothing stays here. It actually goes to other countries, right?
Yeah, you stay in this vicious circle, okay, of selling more and more resources at a price that is being created or fixed somewhere else outside of your country. And yeah, you stay in a dependency of those ones who buy your resources. And you destroy your nature, and you destroy the livelihood.
This makes me wonder whether we can speak about a new kind of relationship which is very similar to the relationship which we had during the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. You have the empire, you have Western Europe, Austrian companies, German companies, French companies who are cutting forests all around Romania and the periphery of the European Union, and then they are importing them back to Europe. And the empire is using the natural resources, not only forests, but healthcare system, education, water, and they are extracting the value in order to serve the center. So could we say that Europe is actually colonizing itself? In part 1, we saw how the richest countries of Europe are extracting the resources of smaller peripheral countries like Greece and Romania in what could be described as a colonial way.
It's quite interesting to look back at the first globalization, the 1890s, the late 19th century, where you got a very similar picture of British, French, German companies investing around the world in sometimes the same kind of sectors, electricity, water, rail, just as they're starting up.
Just as then, the companies buying up these sectors have close links to the state, like energy giants EDF, owned by the French government, and Vattenfall, owned by Sweden. But it's not limited to just European companies and governments. Europe is also facilitating a colonization by larger forces. Sociologist Saskia Sassen says finance, the abstract idea of making money from money, is the real power in the world today.
One way in which I would put it is that we're really dealing with a period that is dominated by a logic of extraction. That is not the language they use. It sounds much better if you say privatization and deregulation. That just sounds like such a intelligent and sober way to go about it. When you say finance, Google, and all kinds of other sectors are extractive sectors, that doesn't feel so good. That feels like something is getting taken out. The financial system, it might as well be mining. It has to go into other sectors and extract. What makes it particularly dangerous, unlike, say, more traditional forms of investment and corporate, is that it can extract, not just from the very rich, but from anything, including very modest.
Even those who once supported the free market are worried. In a century of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, former politician Gaspar Tamás campaigned for Hungary's transition from communism to the free market. But he was horrified when that led to millions losing their jobs. He puts this recent trend into historical context.
So this is the same colonialism without responsibility, without the political project, without the Royal Navy, without the British Raj, without introducing this and that. This is just sheer economic and political force being applied without any kind of responsibility and any kind of idea about economic future, whatever, to the weaker countries.
So basically claiming this is even worse than colonialism, because colonialism...
In many ways it was. This is a politics of total irresponsibility. It's treating everything and everybody in the same manner, maximizing profits and neglecting strategy. And, this is not the old, Krupp company or the old General Motors or the old Standard Oil that had some sort of policy, that had some sort of construction that has been, threshed out to the political authorities and so on and so forth. These companies today didn't have any policy, not even a wrong one, not even an evil one. They just want the money.
Much of that money flows through the city of London, Europe's biggest financial center. But how long London will retain that position is unknown since Britain voted in a referendum to leave the EU in June 2016. This utterly stunned the British and European establishment, who blamed it on the economic losers, who they say are also xenophobic. But Britain was also the pioneer of privatization in Europe, especially in places like Port Talbot in Wales. The last surviving blast furnace of Britain's once mighty steel industry. This facility was sold off in the 80s and is now owned by the Indian giant Tata, who periodically threatened to close it. So I wonder, is it really immigration or economics behind Brexit?
Please,
nice to meet you from Al Jazeera.
Immigration, it's not just a case of they're coming over and taking our jobs. A lot of jobs that they've taken are because people don't want to do them anymore. Farmers will tell you that. Farmers cannot get people to go into a field and pick potatoes or pick sprouts or whatever it might be. Just because we come out of Europe doesn't mean to say it will solve the problem. Because if you still can't get people to pick the sprouts or to pick the fruit, then you're going to let people in to do it.
What is the importance and significance of the steel factory? And how it all could change if it closes down, what would be the effects on ordinary citizens or families and so on.
Without Port Talbot, it puts to risk all the other downstream suppliers that we've got. We've got Trostra, which is 50 miles down the road, that does every single Heinz tin in this country. It originates from Port Talbot and is then tinned in Trostra.
The effect in the economy of the whole of South Wales would be severe if anything happened here.
The knock-on effect would be incredible. Your corner shops, hairdressers, petrol stations, self-employed people, your builders, your carpenters, all these people rely on the steelworks because the people who work in here feed them as well.
The three of you voted to remain on the referendum. How? You didn't vote?
I'll be honest, I'm very disillusioned with the parliamentary processes that go on. It got to a stage where they both sides just turned me off, completely off.
I voted to go out. but we've been dictated to by a bigger union, and I think it's not quite right. So that's where I voted, and for a change. As Marcus said, there are a lot of deprived areas around here, and people had nothing to lose.
So it isn't immigration they're angry about, but the colonial-style extraction Britain has practiced on itself for 35 years. The effects of which are obvious in Mark's hometown of Tredegar, which lost its steel mill in 2013. And all of this is now closed permanently or not?
That is closed permanently.
This one. What was it before?
It was, well, it's been a variety of things. It's been a laundrette, it's been hairdressers.
And how is this connected with the steelworks?
Because businesses set up, they may last a year, 2 years. People can't afford to buy the products or use the services, and they close down. Now if you look around, you'll see it's like takeaways, hairdressers.
No. This is the kind of place supposedly full of hatred for immigrants, but it seems that resentment of foreigners has little to do with their anger at the EU. In the pub, I find out what the issue really is. Prepare for an economics lesson, Welsh style.
In the sort of neoliberal economic model, full employment is not of vital importance. It's failed communities like this, where full employment and in industry were so important, and the result is poverty, crime, and an increase in inequality.
But neoliberalism has caused one major issue, which is you've got companies who are bigger than countries. Yes. So we've got a choice. We're at that crossroads. Do you accept that we're going down a road of this neoliberalism of global corporations, which then start to rule the world, or are we going to start going, well, actually, no, that can't be allowed to happen. What we've got to get back to is assets that are British, assets that are French, assets that are German, are controlled by those states. You know, the biggest freight rail company in this country is German. All our water companies, or our electrical companies, are all foreign. Surely that can't be right.
Do you think after Brexit, UK won't be open to the dangers of globalization, neoliberalism and so on? Or big companies will still be here in UK and have the opportunity for exploitation, tax evasion?
Saying whether we're in or whether we're out doesn't really make a big difference, because they control it whatever.
How can this colonial process of dispossession be taking place on such a massive scale without becoming headline news? Well, this 21st century colonialism doesn't ride into town waving a national flag. It just seems to happen. But it's actually the result of institutions and rules designed to be hidden. I'm going to try and unravel this beginning at the port of Calais. We are going to the so-called jungle, which is a refugee camp in Calais. The jungle is home to those trying to cross the 20 miles of sea between here and Britain. I'm visiting between the French government's regular attempts to clear it at a time when it's still growing. You can still see 3,000 people here who are in a kind of limbo. People from Syria, Afghanistan, Africa, Iraq, and all these countries from war zones. On the other hand, everything is being done to preserve the free floating of goods. The Eurotunnel connects Britain to Europe and covers over $100 billion of trade a year. John Keefe is the Director of Public Affairs.
So what the Channel Tunnel carries is all the high value, the perishable, the just-in-time components for manufacturing, the express deliveries, the internet retail. So companies can actually manage their stock in a constantly moving process. It saves them from having warehousing, saves them enormous costs, and it means that they can have these integrated businesses that operate across the whole of Europe.
The whole area of 35 kilometers is like this?
Yeah. Previously we had sort of boundary fences, the sort of thing that you would see around any factory or any industrial site. Then people started to try and break down the fences. So The answer was increase the quality of the fences. These are the NATO standard high security fences. They're very difficult to cut, they're very difficult to climb. So we now have a very, very sophisticated fencing and surveillance operation here. And since October last year, we've had absolutely no disruption from the migrant crisis.
What about the refugees who came from Syria, from Idomeni, from Greece, and who are actually also trying just to find a better life?
The refugee problem is something which is a geopolitical issue. So we're a company, we're a business that operates between Folkestone and Calais. We don't have a role, a major role in solving the refugee crisis. That's for governments, international institutions to manage. We have a role, a responsibility to our customers, to our shareholders, to our own staff, and to anybody who's on our site.
Eurotunnel security is now a seamless operation involving French and UK forces. A relationship established only after the company sued the governments in a special corporate court.
There were questions as to exactly where that responsibility cut in and how much responsibility Eurotunnel shared. And so there was a case in the International Court for Arbitration in the early 2000s, and the precedent was set there quite clearly that the states have that responsibility.
Obviously, from the perspective of the company, Eurotunnel, it makes sense to ask the cost to be covered from the state. Because in the first place, the state was responsible for the refugee crisis. But it's very interesting to see what is precisely the mechanism which is being used here in order to get the costs being covered by the state. The Court of Arbitration ordered Britain and France to pay Eurotunnel $25 million for the cost of securing against migrants in the late 90s. This is highly controversial, so I'm going to the heart of the EU, Brussels, to talk to someone who knows how these secret processes work. That court is part of the Investor-State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, known as the ISDS, which allows companies to sue states when their profits are threatened.
The whole point about the Investor-State Dispute Mechanism is that it runs outside the court system. It's about a special sort of law for big corporations.
ISDS is part of the TTIP, right?
ISDS is part of the TTIP.
So for most of the ordinary people, if you mention something such as TTIP, they will not understand what it is about.
Okay, well, TTIP is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and it's a major trade deal on the table being discussed now between the European Union and the United States. It has all sorts of implications, you know, from the food you eat, the medicines you take, the vehicles that you drive, the energy that you have, animal welfare, whether you want to keep genetically modified organisms out of your crops, you know, if the worst comes to the worst, and some of the big corporations get what they want, this really could be a potential real rollback of a lot of the very valuable legislation that a lot of people have fought over the years to get in the European Union.
Okay, we follow you.
Right, do the staircase bit?
Supporters, on the other hand, say that harmonization of regulations will grow the European economy by tens of billions of dollars a year. So I thought it would be sensible to see the document. And Jean agreed to take me to the reading room for members of the European Parliament.
It's not open to the public in any sort of way. You only get access to the documents if the institution whose documents they are gives you permission.
Oh, my God.
So if the United States says we're not willing to let you see our documents, you don't get to see them.
It's taken a massive European-wide grassroots campaign for MEPs to be allowed to see the text of the TTIP agreement. And even now, it was proving hard to find.
That's the number that I was given.
Hello. Do you maybe know where is the TTIP room, reading room?
Yeah, because what we were told was 4C17, but obviously that's not right.
4C17, no.
No, but okay. Okay. Apparently I only got half the instructions. It's opposite 4C17.
Okay, let's try again.
Yeah, try again.
Go to the room of the dynasty.
No, it's not that one then.
Oh, but it's opening.
In that case, then it's not the right one.
Hello? Do you maybe know, is this the... No, he says we can't film here. Just tell us we will not film anymore. Is this the TTIP room? TTIP room? No? He confirms it is the room. The huge trade agreement is behind an unfindable, unmarked door with a security keypad. Okay. Thanks.
As a Minister of Finance of Greece, of one of the member states that was affected by these negotiations, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement promising that I would not reveal to my constituents, to my voters, that which I read, if I was allowed to have a look at those negotiating documents. This is preposterous. This is the annulment of the democratic process. Representatives in a representative democracy keeping the demos whom they represent in complete darkness about what they are saying on their behalf.
So why all the secrecy? WikiLeaks has exposed the TTIP and its siblings, the Trans-Pacific Partnership and TISA, a similar deal covering services. So we are going to rescue Julian Assange. At the Ecuadorian embassy in London, he explains why we only know about these agreements from leaks.
These big T3 agreements, TISA, TTIP and TPP, are kept secret because otherwise they'll induce democratic opposition in the population and they won't be possible to negotiate to conclusion. It's pretty obvious.
What do they tell us about the new global order and what are the effects on democracy?
These are the most significant plan to reorder the legal and economic structure of the West and friends at least since the construction of Europe. The nature of the agreements is a construction of a new legal and economic bloc, an ultra-neoliberal system which will cement ultra-neoliberalism within Europe and a wide range of other countries in treaty form, and treaties are very, very hard to change because you need agreement of all the countries participating in the treaty to change it. So it is the end of any other political project. Because only by violating the rule of law, by tearing up these treaties that you've agreed to, that in fact you can proceed in a different political direction.
Do you think this process could be described as colonialism? As a new way of colonialism?
Yes, it's a new multinational colonialism behind these agreements.
These trade agreements reveal hidden mechanisms through which Europe is, on the one hand, colonized by multinational companies and financial institutions, and on the other hand, colonizing itself. However, these very same forces are behind a more traditional style of colonization, which is not through trade agreements, but through bombs and wars. The US, British and French airstrikes against President Gaddafi in Libya in 2011 swept away a regime that was controlling migrant flows from Africa and released huge amounts of weapons into an already unstable region. Leaked emails suggest the real reasons for France's involvement were less than humanitarian.
Gaddafi had accumulated more than 143 tons of gold and was planning to use this to introduce an African dinar as an alternative currency to the franc in Francophone Africa. So this was a threat to French colonialist desires within the Francophone countries.
This reveals precisely how the refugees are linked to Europe's economic crisis. Far from being some kind of a natural disaster, a storm or a flood, it is Europe's colonial behavior abroad that forces them to make their dangerous journeys. Hungarian philosopher Agnes Heller has lived through a lot of European history, including losing her father in Auschwitz. She says the refugees challenge Europe's core idea of itself.
In the 18th century, already in the first constitution of France, two rights became lex lata, were in the constitution. The right of man, droit de l'homme, and the right of the citizen, droit de citoyen. The problem is that nowadays the two are in a conflict situation in Europe. That is droit de man, that there's a human right would basically oblige us to take all the refugees because they are indeed men like us. They are like us, they are born with reason and conscience and the equal right to liberty and to freedom and to all kinds of freedoms and to life just like us. So we have to let them in. On the other hand, we invented also the right of citizens. In a country, in a state, citizens should decide who can enter the territory or not. This is the right of the citizen. The first time in our history, short history, 200 years history, it occurred that the right of man and the right of citizen are colliding with each other. Of course, a good government can persuade the citizen to give priority to human rights. A bad government like us persuades the citizen not to do it at all. Forget about human rights generally.
So maybe the danger they pose is not that 1 or even 2 million people could overwhelm a continent of over 500 million, but because admitting we should provide for these fellow humans would reveal how Europe's own citizens have been stripped of their resources and democracy by this financial colonization. In episode 2, we look at how the anger and frustration this generates is manifesting itself politically on both sides of the spectrum, and search out some hope for Europe's future.
We don't want the state to involve because this is a movement of people.
Den Volksentscheid gewonnen, 450.000 Leute, die Ja.
The European Parliament in Brussels, where the people of Europe send their representatives. Oh, these are the boxes of the MPs. They belong to the people whose job it is to hold the European Union to account. Ah, look! You can even look inside. What do they do here? Nothing. There's a hugely important debate about the future of the European Union today, and I'm trying to see it. No. I mean, it's impossible for ordinary people to get in. It's the European Parliament and it's not accountable. Like even in Croatia, in the Parliament, you have a balcony where the ordinary people can come every day and look what's happening, but here, no. The closest I can get is the press room, where we get to see our representatives on TV. But then, the European Parliament is unique. Normally, parliaments devise their own laws, but here they can only accept or reject legislation from the unelected European Commission.
You know, when I came here 17 years ago,
It's one of the reasons former UKIP leader Nigel Farage says Britain voted to leave the EU. And just days after the Brexit vote, he's relishing his success.
well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you?
Ah,
No. As a policy to impose poverty on Greece and the rest of the Mediterranean, you've done very well. By stealth, by deception, without ever telling the truth. You have imposed upon them a political union.
Yeah, the worst thing is that he is right. Everything what Farage said is correct until now.
It was indeed a seismic
That's the tragedy of the European Union. I may not agree with what he stands for, But that's the paradox of Europe today. So what has caused this anger against Europe? One question. Yes. How do you explain the rise of UKIP and Front National and Jobbik in Europe?
I don't know. How do you explain the rise of Podemos? How do you explain the rise of Syriza? You know, how do you explain it? It's a failing European Union. No one wants it.
Yes, Al Jazeera.
You are getting the growth of parties across the political spectrum, a growth of rejectionism of this model, because the model doesn't work.
So what do we have then? I mean, we have nation states, cocoons of nation states, borders, walls. Isn't this dangerous for...
And democracy.
But where is democracy?
Well, there's none here.
So I'm going on a journey to understand how come the far right can claim to be the saviors of democracy in Europe. In episode 1, we saw how Europe is facilitating its own colonization through privatization, the extraction of resources, and secret trade deals like the TTIP.
The nature of the agreements is a construction of an ultra-neoliberal system which will cement ultra-neoliberalism within Europe.
And the financial forces behind that colonization are driving governments into wars abroad, which in turn are producing refugee flows that challenge an already anxious population.
The major decisions that determine how life is lived are made without popular participation. And that causes anger, frustration, contempt for the parliamentary system, and it leads to erratic and often frightening reactions. That's coupled with a severe economic crisis.
In this episode, I'll examine how the anger and frustration generated by this veiled colonization could be the end of European democracy as we know it. In November 2015, terrorists attacked Paris, killing 130 people, leaving over 300 injured. Attacks on Brussels airport and Nice followed, all carried out in the name of ISIL. So how did Europe make sense of this? We discussed it as coming out of nowhere, inexplicable acts committed by evil people because of their adherence to a religious ideology. But just because an act is inexcusable doesn't mean it's inexplicable. Noam Chomsky is a prolific writer on international relations and the origins of terrorism.
You look at Nice, Brussels, these are people from the miserable suburbs of Paris and Belgium. It's internal problems that are leading to terrorist attacks. Again, the people involved, people who've been picked up by the police at least, have very few shallow Islamic roots. They're drawn to jihadism as a kind of a way out of degradation and humiliation and internal repression.
The Belgian and Paris attacks were carried out by men from Brussels. Ihsan Hawash runs a youth center here in the district of Molenbeek. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, nice to meet you.
Yeah, welcome to Molenbeek.
Oh, thanks. Will you show us around a bit?
Yeah, let's go.
You encounter any kind of discrimination maybe already in your childhood because you are of Muslim origin?
There were a lot of racism in my school. My teacher spent a lot of time like just spreading false things about Muslims, about Moroccan, about Arabs, about African. It was hard for a child to live like that.
Some of the terrorists who committed the terrorist attacks in Madrid, in Paris, and also here were from Molenbeek. Is the level of discrimination higher today after the terrorist attacks?
Well, yes and no, because actually, of course, after the attacks, we felt like more like we were just like, oh no, not again a Muslim, oh no, not again a Molenbeek. I mean, when you see the people who committed some attacks, they were not really Muslim, we practice a lot their religion. They were people that some months before, they were standing in the cafe and drinking alcohol. So the problem is not Islam, the problem is not Molenbeek, the problem is not the youth. The problem is mainly about all the things that we did and did not do as politicians and as media also, that make them feel, those people, so excluded from the society. So they were just like weak enough to be onboarded in some extreme areas.
But could this just be anecdotal? I want to find some hard evidence. So we arrived at the Free University of Brussels, and we are trying to see where is the office of Dr. Corinne. Corinne has been studying the experiences of Muslims in Belgium, including discrimination and radicalization. Ah, here it is.
What we observe in Belgium is that if you have a Moroccan or Turkish or African background, you have between 20 and 30% less chance to get a job, even if you have an higher degree.
Is there any data, and what is your explanation for those people who are second and third generation for turning to a more radicalized version of Islam?
We are in societies which have difficulties to provide and to produce sense. We always say that there is no more difference between left and right. They are answering questions, sometimes in very Manichaean and white and black ways to deal with these answers, but they are answering these issues and they are providing sense. And if we don't understand this, we are not going to fight against this ideology properly.
And could we explain the recent rise of Europe's far right in the same way, as a desperate search for sense? Across Europe, openly xenophobic parties are the rising political force. In Austria, presidential candidate Norbert Hofer stoked anti-refugee sentiment.
Wir haben auf jeden Fall gewonnen. Auf jeden Fall.
Even in Germany, the Alternative für Deutschland party are now winning seats in the regional parliaments. In an attempt to eliminate them, many parties of the center adopted their xenophobia.
Ce voile intégral représente de manière tout à fait extraordinaire tout ce que la France rejette spontanément. C'est le symbole de l'asservissement des femmes et l'étendard, comme vous l'écrivez, de l'intégrisme extrémiste. Soit déposé dans les meilleurs délais.
But France's burqa ban didn't neutralize the anti-immigration Front National. Instead, it helped legitimize their leader, Marine Le Pen, who is now a serious contender for the next presidential election. If she wins, she's pledged to take France out of the EU. It's easy to dismiss the supporters of the far right as ignorant racists, but the current reality is much more complex. In Slovenia, anti-refugee sentiment has boosted the far right, but it's a symptom of a deeper crisis, says philosopher Slavoj Žižek.
I think that it is absolutely crucial, for example, when you talk about horror of new racism, anti-immigrants and so on, that you read it as a symptom, as a reaction of what is wrong in today's big global capitalism. That's the key. Don't moralize. Don't just accuse ordinary people. How can they be so low and so on? Listen, I can totally understand a French ordinary worker who feels threatened. Don't attack just anti-immigrant populists. but ask the question, what went wrong in society that opened up the space for anti-immigrant racism?
Jobbik are possibly Europe's most xenophobic party, and the third largest in the Hungarian parliament.
Agyon az Isten! Különlegesek vagyunk mi itt Európában. De nem azért, mert mi vagyunk a legantiszemitább nép, hanem azért, mert ha akár egész Európa is az ő lábunk előtt fog heverni, ha akár egész Európa az ő lábukat fogja nyalni, mi akkor sem fogjuk.
And like most of Europe's far right, alongside their intolerance of foreigners, runs promises of economic protection. After 26 years of transition from communism, Hungary remains one of the poorest countries of the EU. There are still nearly 1 million people living in homes without electricity and heating. And Jobbik's young leader Gábor Vonnar knows they are angry.
A Szovjetunióból menekülve és a kommunizmusból menekülve azt gondoltuk, hogy a demokratikus európai közösséghez való csatlakozásunk az majd egy gazdasági sikerrel is fog párosulni. De aztán rá kellett jönnünk, hogy sokszor a nyugati cégek, vagy a már korán multinacionális tőke számára Magyarország az piacként és olcsó munkaerőbázisként jelenik meg.
How do you explain the success of Jobbik in Hungary?
Jobbik jelen pillanatban Magyarországon a második legerősebb politikai párt, a kormánypárt mögött. Mire külön fölhívnám a figyelmet, az egy londoni kutatóintézetnek a nemrégiben elkészített elemzése. És nagyon érdekes volt, hogy a Magyarországon élő, vagy a magyar 35 év alattiak körében a Jobbik támogatottsága 53%-os. Ez egy óriási felelősség, és azt gondolom, hogy Jobbik ereje igazából ebben van, hogy a Magyarországon élő magyar fiatalokat meg tudta szólítani. Azt az életérzést, amiben nagyon sok keserűség van, nagyon sok csalódottság, nagyon sok reményvesztettség, de azért mégis van benne remény, hit, bizalom a jövő iránt. Ez úgy keveredik. Ezt az életérzést mi meg tudtuk szólítani.
And like in other parts of Europe, Jobbik's success has pushed Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán further to the right.
Veszély fenyegeti a helyreállított közrendet és a terrormentes közbiztonságot. És veszély fenyegeti a lassan ismét magára találó nemzeti kultúránkat is.
So in 2015, Orbán built a fence to keep the refugees out of Hungary, a move many welcomed. Other countries across Europe quickly followed, and the borders were sealed.
Mother family, please. There are the mother family, please.
This is post-fascism, says Hungarian political scientist Gáspár Tamás. A new form of the ideology that can operate within free markets and democracy.
The class recomposition that is coming this time from the right. It is very successful, in which public opinion accepts that there is an in and there's an out, there's an interior and there's an exterior, and even the remaining old left is defending the ins and rejecting the outs. And in that respect, even the center left is being conquered by this logic. Basically, in economic terms, neoliberalism on the one hand is accepted. The enmity towards the East, call it Russia or call it Islam, is accepted. And the abandonment of the unemployed, aged, ill, etc. populations within even the core countries is accepted.
But if we accept the logic of ins and outs, if we create another to blame for our economic failures, Are we not also creating the conditions for authoritarian fascism? Philosopher Agnes Heller, whose father was killed in Auschwitz, thinks we need reminding about Europe's bloody past.
European leaders were totally blind, and in a way they forgot about the European past. Europe in the 20th century has murdered 100 million Europeans. All European countries were either dictatorship or subjected themselves to dictatorships, either Nazism or fascism or Stalinism. So what remained democratic in Europe? Basically almost nothing. And even after the Second World War, when liberal democracies started to develop in Western Europe, they developed only in Western Europe. What was the case in Spain, in Portugal, in Greece? There were dictatorships. A liberal democracy is new in Europe, and they pretended that it was our tradition, it was centuries old, which was it not. As long as things go well, economy is increasing, people get richer and richer every year, at this point, liberal democracy is fantastic. The moment economy does not work that well, there are migrants, there are problems, then immediately it's falling apart. People don't want it anymore. They call for a Führer, they call for a leader, they call for a strong man or a strong woman.
And it's not just in Europe that people are turning to so-called strongmen in the hope of economic protection. However deceptive that may turn out to be. But the anger and frustration at Europe's financial colonization also took a very different form. A recent example of it is to be found in Paris. When President Hollande tried to introduce a new law that loosens French labor rights and makes work more precarious, the usual demonstrations led to something else. An occupation. For the last 2 months, hundreds of activists have gathered here every evening for what they call the Nuit debout, the night standing.
Et donc la démocratie pour eux c'était un régime archaïque, ils ne se référaient pas à Athènes.
The center is the General Assembly, where up to 5,000 people gather to discuss how to solve problems, from the refugee crisis to precarious work and the environment, even when the weather turns bad. Such an occupation has different committees, a committee for ecology, a committee for economy, a committee for legal matters and so on. They conceptualize, discuss different proposals or ideas, and then they come with the proposals and the ideas to the General Assembly. And then at the General Assembly, all of them together in a process of deliberation, they decide on the next steps. The Economy Committee wanted to be interviewed together. What are the topics you are, specifically your group, dealing with at the Economy Commission?
The first goal of our commission is to allow to people to reappropriate the economic debate which is stolen by experts.
Avec la coordination intermittente, nous avions gagné au Conseil d'État.
Why do you think it makes sense to gather here at, at this square, there is rain falling and so on, if we have already parliamentary democracy and parliaments and institutions?
En fait, je pense que on a besoin de ça, comme Nuit debout, de place, parce que en fait, le Parlement ne représente pas très bien en fait la population. Toute la population, à mon député qui est en plus premier secrétaire du Parti socialiste, il répond jamais. Je veux dire, il s'en fout en fait. On n'a pas de poids vis-à-vis de lui. Ce qu'il écoute, c'est les entreprises en fait. Donc du coup, c'est pour ça qu'on a besoin de lieux comme ici, puisque faut bien un endroit où on puisse discuter, où on puisse essayer de faire des choses. Donc voilà, c'est la politique.
Politique qu'incarne aujourd'hui l'extrême droite. Et puis vous avez cette constituante par mail.
What people are lacking in representative democracy, to put it very simply, is representation. They don't feel represented. The people to whom we spoke during the Nuit debout, most of them said, I don't even go to vote anymore because I don't want to vote for Hollande, I don't want to vote for Le Pen. They realize that the real power is not even anymore in the national governments. The real power is at the Eurogroup, in the ECOFIN, in the European Commission, European Central Bank, institutions where all of these people who are here tonight are not represented at all. It's the same realization that sparked the 2011 wave of resistance, which spread from Syntagma Square in Greece and Puerta del Sol in Spain, across Europe to Bulgaria, Romania, Slovenia, and even Croatia. In Bosnia, the citizens' assemblies went beyond making easy to satisfy demands, and like all colonial resistance movements, demanded the right to rule themselves. What we can see in the European Union today is that we have at least two directions. One direction we have seen in Hungary and in other countries where we have the rise of fascist, right-wing extremist movements. What we can see in Paris today is that we have also an attempt of direct democracy which is not linked to right-wing extremism, but it is linked to the critique of the labor law, which was the trigger for this protest. It is linked to solidarity movements which try to help the refugees, and it is a creation of a new political imagination. And in part two, we look at where that could take us.
This is my old motive that I like to call V for Vendetta Part 2. We all saw the movie, Part 1. We remember how it ends, the movie. The crowd, negrish multitude, storms the parliament, the people take over. Okay, as I always repeat, I'm ready to sell my mother into slavery. Okay, she is dead, but even if she would be alive, to see a film called V for Vendetta Part 2. But what happened then? Okay, people take over. What new laws how do they change the state? What did they do?
It's a great question, and maybe one that political theory can't answer. Maybe instead the answer is to be found in how ordinary people are coping with the crisis. In Greece, some of the energy from Syntagma Square has come here. What we can see here looks like a very ordinary market. Things seem like any other market in Europe. We can see people selling nuts, people selling fruits, people selling cheese. But it's not an ordinary market. It's a very unique market. A complete parallel economy is being created in Greece because of the financial crisis. It's called the No Middleman movement, and it's a response to Greece's powerful supermarkets, who try to increase prices while paying farmers less. So some decided to cut out the middleman and sell basics like eggs and potatoes directly to the people. The big difference is customers order everything in advance through the organizers and come here before picking up their goods. And it's changing shopping habits as people group together to buy cheaply in bulk. It's busy today.
No, it's not so busy.
It's not so busy.
Because usually we have like 1,000 orders, pre-orders.
Really? In 1 month?
In 1 month.
What is the amount of money which is circulating? Do you know statistically?
Last year, the average amount of the order was about 60 euros. This year, less than 50, 45 to 50. Because the people are very, very short on money. It's getting worse every year. It's getting worse because of the crisis.
The community-run market also asks everyone to help support those in need.
Because the producer have to give a percentage of the sales in food for the solidarity.
What is the percentage they give?
About, I think, 2%.
So this is the basket of solidarity. Already now the goods come inside.
But not from the producer. Every one of the consumer who comes here may, if he or she wants, put some food for the solidarity. When this movement of solidarity started, we had just 10 families. Now, after 4
memorandums. We have 140 families that need our help.
So the state is not involved in this?
No, and we don't want the state to involve because this is a movement of peoples who have the power.
They took the power back. They couldn't rely anymore on the government. And on the other hand, they didn't want to sell the goods to the supermarkets. What I find particularly interesting as someone who was born in Yugoslavia, which experimented with so-called self-management socialism, is that all of this functions as a kind of self-management. Although when you speak to the people, they wouldn't describe themselves as socialists. You see such things, it gives us hope that in the European Union things could go differently. You can see why the no middleman movement wants to stand apart from the state. But to bring about large-scale change, don't citizen-led movements need to be braver? I'm in Hamburg, Germany, the heart of the European Empire, to hear about one such movement that's profoundly changed the city. Germany has a very active environmental movement as demonstrated in actions like this one in 2010. It was a protest against Vattenfall. The Swedish company had allowed repeated accidents to occur at nearby nuclear power plants. So 120,000 people joined hands to link the two power stations together, a distance of over 100 kilometers. After that protest, Hamburgers felt empowered to take on powerful companies as well as the state, under the leadership of Wiebke Hansen. We came here. Where are we?
Ja, wir sind hier an einem Umspannwerk in der Nähe von Hamburg. Hier wird der Strom vom Umland aus Hamburg so weit runtergedrosselt, dass er in der Stadt verteilt werden.
So such a thing was previously in private ownership, right?
Ja, genau.
And now such grids are in public ownership.
Nun gehört es der öffentlichen Hand, ja.
In the 1990s, the EU urged countries to liberalize, called for privatize their energy markets. Sweden's Vattenfall took over much of Germany's energy supply, including Hamburg's electricity grid, until Wiebke's campaign convinced the city to buy it back.
Das ist unser erstes Logo. Damit haben wir 17.200 irgendwas Unterschriften gesammelt. Das ist unser zweites Logo. Damit haben wir 117.000 Unterschriften gesammelt für das zweite Stufe. Den Volksentscheid gewonnen, 450.000 Leute, die Ja.
And what were the main arguments of the campaign?
Wir die Energienetze in öffentlicher Hand brauchen, damit wir sie für die Energiewende einsetzen können. Die Energiewende ist ja eine komplexe Sache und die Netze spielen dabei eine verbindende Rolle. Und dass es auch besser für den Verbraucher ist, wenn das in öffentlicher Hand ist.
But they only managed a narrow win in the referendum, with just 50.9% in favor. Probably because they were up against the entire establishment, the mayor, the main center-left and right parties, the energy companies, and even the unions.
Also ich erinnere mich schon oft daran, dass die Hamburger so viel bewegt haben. Gegen so viel Widerstand von Politik und Konzernen und riesigen, mächtigen Interessensgruppen haben wir Bürgerinnen und Bürger uns diese Netze wieder zurückgeholt. Und das bewegt mich heute noch.
And in 2016, Hamburg bought back the energy grid, so now its profits go back to the city. The gas and heating networks will follow soon, a nightmare for the energy companies and their investors.
Ging es dann darum, so wäre den Anfängen mäßig, wenn jetzt das Volk fordert, die Netze sollen in öffentlicher Hand, was ist dann das Nächste? Das ist so die Angst des Kapitals vor dem Bürger, der sich das, was ihm eigentlich gehört, zurückholt.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was huge enthusiasm for privatizations and free market ideology. What we have seen in Hamburg is that maybe today this idea is challenged and we have a new kind of enthusiasm, which is enthusiasm to take back the public assets. Since then, 170 German towns have taken back control of their energy grid. Some as a result of pressure from citizens, some through the policies of forward-thinking mayors. In the former East Germany, one such mayor has come up with a unique way of handling the refugee crisis. On my journey, I've seen refugees forced to live in appalling conditions and defined as the political other. But in Friedland, they have taken a different approach. This was once a busy town full of factories processing regional agricultural produce. But the fall of the Berlin Wall saw factories close and the jobs leave. Mayor Wilfried Block of the center-right Christian Democrats is a former factory worker determined to save the town.
Das gehört auch mit zur Zuckerfabrik. Das war ein großer Betrieb.
Luckily for Friedland, the mayor has plenty of energy.
Hier die Fabrik nachher auch aus zum Schluss. Also hier war einer der größten Betriebe unserer Stadt, die Zuckerfabrik, wo Zuckerrüben aufgekauft und verarbeitet wurden. Erstmal zu Sirup und dann eben auch bis zu Weißzucker hin, ne? Also den man dann in den Tee macht. Und hier haben in der Kampagne über 200 Menschen gearbeitet. Kampagne heißt in der Zeit, wo die Rüben angeliefert wurden.
When the Berlin Wall came down, West Germany privatized the state-owned East German economy. Enterprises deemed uncompetitive were sold for a pittance and closed.
Die Wende habe ich selbst gewollt, da bin ich selber für eingetreten. Aber die wirtschaftliche Einheit zu vollziehen, um das vielleicht auf Augenhöhe zu machen, das war nicht so. Es war ein enormer Vorsprung auf westlicher Seite da, gerade im Wirtschaftsbereich. Und das war für unsere Region schlimm eigentlich. Und dass dann eben diese nicht wettbewerbsfähigen Betriebe abgewickelt wurden, auch ohne dafür irgendein Substitut zu finden oder irgendeinen Ersatz an Arbeitsplätzen.
Despite attempts to attract new industry, most young people move away. So the population here is shrinking and getting older.
Wir sind eine Stadt und uns fehlen die Menschen. Wir haben Häuser, aber es wohnt keiner mehr drin. Uns fehlen die Menschen. Das wäre schlimm.
So the mayor had an idea to both help refugees in need and revive his town.
Weil dort eben durch die Möglichkeiten, die Ballungsräume bieten, für die Menschen auch andere Entwicklungsmöglichkeiten sind. Aber ich sage, warum soll es uns nicht gelingen, Angebote zu unterbreiten, erstmal zu zeigen, dass sie willkommen sind und dass dann welche sagen, sie haben auch eigene Geschäftsideen. Wir haben heute das Web, das weltweite Netz, wo man auch von solchen Standorten, die eigentlich am Rande liegen, vielleicht Geschäftsideen entwickeln kann. Also ich sage, man muss mal querdenken und sagen, deshalb bescheide ich mich auch und sage, wenn wir 10%, vielleicht 20% derer, die hier als Flüchtlinge kommen, halten können, wäre es gut.
So they've asked for more than their quota of refugees, and they're even trying minor bribery to convince them to stay. Clothing exchange. You can see this is the place where the refugees for €1 they can get 3 pieces of clothes. Ja,
Genau.
Ja, genau.
Genau.
Jetzt sehen wir uns mal da. Oh, das ist groß.
Ja.
Ich bin auch ein Flüchtling. Kann ich für €1 3 Stück kriegen?
Männersachen haben wir immer nicht so sehr viel.
Nein.
Ich mach mal hier bloß ein bisschen Licht an.
Ja, aber gibt es auch für Kinder hier Sachen?
Ja, alles, ja.
Kinder. Und die Kinder, wenn die Kinder €1 kriegen, können sie auch 3 Sachen kriegen.
Manchmal schenken wir auch.
Ja?
Ja, wenn hier so eine kleinen Kinder mitkommen, die kriegen dann auch mal was geschenkt.
Talking to the mayor, you begin to understand why Angela Merkel was keen for Germany to accept so many Syrian refugees.
Wir brauchen ja einen Pflegebereich, Dienstleistung, Gastronomie. Es gibt Bereiche, wo Leute brauchen. Ärzte, Gesundheitswesen, Betreuung, brauchen wir Leute. Aber die sind nicht von alleine da. Ja. Man muss schauen und man muss anderen eine Chance geben, wenn wir wissen, dass es ein paar Jahre dauert.
With 450 refugees living in this small town, there is the potential for conflict and misunderstanding. But the mayor has set up a committee to avoid just that.
Schönen guten Tag.
So this is the meeting of the refugee committee.
Guten Tag. Block.
Hello. Social services, the job center, churches, schools and businesses all send representatives here. Aha, gibt es vielleicht einen Repräsentativen von den Flüchtlingen hier?
Nee. Meeting, das haben wir noch nicht, aber vielleicht eine Idee.
Ja, we don't have it yet, but maybe it's a good idea.
Im Jobcenter muss ich dann auch sagen, auch wenn man keine ganze Klasse zusammenkriegt, dass es aber schön ist, dass wir hier vor Ort dringend medizinische Berufe brauchen, was ich Ihnen erzählt habe, dass wir in 5 Jahren 4 allgemein niedergelassene Ärzte verlieren und dass wir sehr scharf werden, wenn wir zum Beispiel einen syrischen Arzt oder einen aus Afghanistan kriegen. Frau Drews hat mal gesagt, hier in der Gemeinschaftsunterkunft war ein syrischer Arzt.
Aber er war schon hier?
Wir haben uns darum bemüht, aber der ist schon in Berlin.
Weil alle wollen nach Berlin gehen, oder was?
Oder Hamburg, diese Städte brauchen nicht, die brauchen nicht werben.
So there was a doctor from Syria already here. Where is he today? In Berlin. So what they are trying to do is actually, because 4 of the doctors who are here now are going into pension, and they want to keep some of the Afghan or Syrian doctors here. So they are also discussing this at the moment, because they are in need for doctors. The town is now famous for its quest to find a new population. But what do the refugees think? Here in Friedland, how do the people who live here, how do they treat you?
Or sometimes they saw us as the strangers, you know. But in general, they are good.
Do you live in one of these apartments?
Yeah, I lived here from 6 months. Yeah, I have 5 persons in the house with me, but the house is good. Yeah.
Would you stay in Friedland if you would find a job here, or do you have... No. Why? Too small? Is it too small, or...?
Yeah, it's small, and I want to complete my study in university.
Which you can probably only do in a bigger city like Berlin or Hamburg,
Berlin or Hamburg or Stuttgart, maybe.
The mayor knows that's how most will react. That's why his plan rests on just 10% of the refugees wanting to stay. Most of the population in Europe in 10 or 20 years will be population above 60 or 70. So in a way, the coming of refugees to this town presents a possibility, because younger people come, a younger population. And I think it can be applied on the European level as well. Maybe precisely the refugees can be a hope for revitalization of the continent. And what it shows is that a real change can be done on the municipal level, and that maybe radical politics of the 20th century is not on the supranational, international level, but on the local level. We've seen radical movements in big cities and a compassionate mayor in a small town. But to even begin to bring about change on the scale Europe needs will require new and radical thinking in a major city. Spain's second largest city is now run by Barcelona and Comú, a radical coalition of environmental and housing activists. Two years ago, Ada Colau was attempting to stop people being evicted from their homes.
Aquí realmente lo único que tenemos es una injusticia tremenda, que es una persona que contra su voluntad ha dejado de pagar porque se ha quedado en el paro, porque no tiene más que 426 euros de ingresos mínimos, teniendo un hijo a su cargo, y encima la Caja, que ha hecho miles de millones de beneficios durante estos años, le desahucia sin piedad, se queda con la propiedad de la casa y encima le sigue reclamando 100.000 euros de deuda amparada por una ley injusta que tenemos en el Estado español.
Now, when she speaks up for a family who have been evicted, she does so as the mayor of Barcelona.
Por ello, me atrevo a afirmar que estamos ante un gran propietario con mala fe que antepone los intereses especulativos, en este caso para poseer un edificio entero con el que poder especular, por encima de derechos fundamentales como es el derecho a la vivienda o los derechos de los niños y las niñas.
But can such radicals run a large and complex 21st century global city of nearly 2 million residents? Every year, over 7 million tourists descend on Barcelona. They spend over $13 billion. But their impact is now so huge, they've become one of the problems facing new politicians like Deputy Mayor Gerardo Pisarello.
This is La Barceloneta, which is one of the most popular neighborhoods of Barcelona. It used to be a neighborhood of fishermen. Well, one of the problems we are having here is that the prices of houses have started to increase, and many people are being forced to leave the neighborhood. Here we used to have a squat house, a squat community here, called Miles de Vivienda, which means thousands of houses for everyone. And in this squat house used to live our actual mayor and some members of the government.
Ada Colau.
She was a squatter.
Really, here?
Yes, here. And now that we are in the government of the city council, we will have cooperatives here, and that's what we're trying to foster. I mean, cooperative housing, new forms of tenancy. And here in La Barceloneta, what we've been doing is we've been forcing banks to negotiate with the city council to give us, buildings, empty buildings, just to have them for social rental. And that's very important. I mean, we don't depend on banks because we haven't financiated our campaign with banks. And that's important because you're free from banks, and that gives you a certain margin to negotiate with them.
Where are we now?
Well, this is one of the first buildings we bought when it came to power. And this is a building that we are rehabilitating now. I mean, it's not easy because we as a city council, we don't have all the legislative power to do everything. We cannot change the city from night to day. But we are also putting pressure on the regional government and on the central government to change the laws. And if we don't have pressure on the streets, there are many changes that cannot be done.
You are saying that you as a city councillor and someone who is part of the institutions would like to see more pressure from the street?
We not only need pressure, but we need alternative forms of organization. People have to organize them.
And cooperatives.
Cooperatives, they have to produce in a different way, they have to consume in a different way. And we as an administration cannot be an obstacle. We have to go along with them, but it's not the administration who will do the democratic revolution.
So is this what happens when the people take over the palace? And Barcelona Town Hall is a palace. I'm going to meet the mayor at last. Do you think this model of Barcelona, but also something which we could call the rebel cities, it's not only Barcelona, it is now the city of Naples, Zaragoza, and so on, could be a model for Europe as such, in the sense that going from bottom up, from the municipal, from the local level, we could come to a national level and even change Europe on this transnational, international level.
En un momento de crisis democrática, que no es solo en España, es en Europa y es en general, ¿no? Es una situación global de la crisis de la democracia formal. Hoy los principales retos, la regeneración democrática, la innovación, la refundación del modelo económico, la participación, la transparencia, la inmigración, la cohesión social, o sea, los principales retos que tenemos se concentran en las grandes ciudades, que es donde está la inmensa mayoría de la población. Las ciudades, que son la administración más cercana a la gente, tienen que ser mucho más protagonistas por el bien de todos, no porque nos disputemos el poder, sino por el bien de la humanidad, ¿no? Entonces creo que efectivamente Europa se debe refundar desde abajo, y eso Barcelona sola queremos ser una ilusión, y queremos ser sobre todo una ciudad amiga que anime a otras ciudades amigas a sumarnos y entre todos hacerlo, porque solos no podremos.
So maybe it will be a network of cities like Barcelona where people finally feel represented. Because the city is close enough to the people to be held accountable, yet powerful enough to make a difference to their lives. But on my journey, I've seen how the financial forces colonizing Europe have captured nation-states and even the European Union. So maybe it's naive to suppose such movements can make a difference. Or maybe we're judging too quickly.
If you look over history,
the movements that have achieved something consistently appeared to have failed in that they didn't achieve their goals right away and were beaten back, but they left a residue and a legacy from which things moved forward. And I think that'll be true here.
So let's not dismiss those who are brave enough to be optimistic. So what we have seen with the so-called Arab Spring is that it's not enough to occupy a square. You have to be able to create a permanent organization, even if it means new political parties, but which wouldn't be vertical, but which would integrate precisely the experience of the occupations. And be aware that all of Europe, but also the world, is watching what is happening in Paris.